Good afternoon, everybody. What is with this thing? Give me 1 second. It seems to have trouble going sideways. Okay, well, maybe that'll do. I'm experimenting with format here, bear with me. There we go. I know this isn't a fireside chat, but it's going to have to do. Good afternoon, and welcome to Bible Study in Exile. I'm your friendly host, Father Leo. And today we get to what has been read all over the place, the Red Sea. So it should be an interesting romp into the climax of the Exodus story, at least for this particular story of redemption. The Exodus story is far bigger than simply the name would imply, namely leaving Egypt. There's an even bigger climax that we'll probably get to in a couple of weeks' time. We'll have to see. Okay? So with that, why don't we say a prayer and go from there. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord, who came among us not to be served, but to serve, and to give your life as a ransom for many, open our minds and inflame our hearts with the ability to see and cooperate with your redeeming plan, that we may be able to extend to the very ends of the earth the full knowledge and love of you that you have instilled in us. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord, and we pray as he taught. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Okay, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, well, welcome to another installment, and we're getting to one of the more dramatic parts of the Exodus story. There's only one that tops it, and I'm going to kind of keep that on the DL. But for now, if you remember from last week, we had the sense of the Egyptians driving the Israelites from the land, just to get rid of the problem. They sent them away. They sent them away, even giving them gold and silver and precious things in an effort to, well, sweeten the deal, sweeten the pot. So here we are, looking at the Israelites in flight. And of course, Pharaoh is so obstinate that he's not going to leave it here. Even now, there's more to see in how it turns out, no? That's kind of the tragedy of it all. So, the preceding chapter in 13, it talks about the redemption of the firstborn, how there would be in Israel a right to redeem each firstborn child by animal sacrifice in acknowledgement of the redemption that they received in Egypt from the death of the firstborn. So there is in this understanding a sense that all life belongs to God. And it's made clear in Genesis. We talked about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac and his would-be sacrifice. And we talked there about how God definitively rejects human sacrifice as something acceptable to him. He turns away from that, and turns Abraham away from that, and turns all of Israel away from that. But the significance of it, namely that life belongs to the Lord, is something that he insists on. And it goes for extension for each of us. I think this understanding of redeeming the firstborn will come to its full flower and understanding only when we look at Christ's redemption and whom he's redeemed, right? He, the firstborn of all creation, in whom all primacy finds expression, becomes the pattern and the antitype for everything here. That this redemption of the firstborn in the middle of chapter 13 is something that suggests the redemption that Christ will give. Moving on, though, this is verse 17 of chapter 13 of Exodus. Now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Two things to bring up here. One is, this way of the Philistines would have been the coastal route. Say you're going down to Washington, D.C. There's two ways you could really go, right? One is the easier way. You go down 95, right? You go down this path that takes you down the lowlands. You know, when you hug the shore, you're not going to be crossing a lot of mountains. But one of the downsides of taking 95, right, is that you deal with a lot of traffic. You could also attempt to go inland, right? You take 84, you do some maneuvers, you could eventually get to like 81 or 78 or all that stuff in western Pennsylvania and come down to Washington by that road. And that road's a much longer road, but arguably you'd get less traffic that way. That's at least the logic I'm trying to bring up here. And so when God says that they should not go by way of the Philistines, although it was nearer, he's basically saying don't take 95. And here, the question isn't taking 95 because of the traffic, it's taking 95 because you have these warlike tribes who are going to stop you. And it seems clear that the Israelites do not have enough resolve to face down the Philistines in battle. Not at this point. They'd be more likely to turn back. And when we go through the 40 years wandering in the desert, you'll see that dimension too. Now, that's part of this as well. So, with that in mind, they go the roundabout way to the Sea of Reeds. Now this is sort of awkward too. The Sea of Reeds is not the Red Sea. It's not the Red Sea. It seems to be some lowland lake that would have been in the height of in Upper Egypt. Let's see what the note here says in the Jewish Study Bible, because again, Red Sea is how it's rendered in Greek. Reed Sea, Yam Suf, Reed Sea is how it's rendered in Hebrew. Comment from this commentary. An unidentified body of water, probably in the Isthmus of Suez, the strip of land, lakes, and marshes between the Gulf of Suez and the Mediterranean. The strip traversed by the Suez Canal today. See the map on 122. So here's what they believe. I'm going to give you a little high-tech map here. You see how professional we are. Oh yeah, you probably only see everything backwards, right? But you may notice that as you go east out of Egypt, it passes over that lake. A significant lake, granted, but it's a lake, not a sea in the full sense. So quite frankly, the Reed Sea would have been something. It wouldn't have been pushing through the whole ocean, but it would have been a shallow lake. Shallow could be 40 feet deep, but I mean a shallower lake that would have been along the route. Now the Greek again renders it Red Sea. So we don't really know, is the bottom line. The indication though is for something like this. Okay. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. They went out armed. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph. Remember that, the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you. And remember that when we talked about the death of Joseph, that pivotal event that ends the book of Genesis, that in a sense the Israelites taking the relics, the remains of Joseph with them, they're fulfilling a pledge. Because Joseph is supposed to be buried in the Holy Land. It's where his fathers were buried, it's where his mother was buried. That's where his ancestors lay. And he exacted this promise from them that he might share in the heritage they were meant for, that the Jews were meant for. So that's sort of what we're talking about here when we talk about moving the remains of Joseph. It's a fulfillment of a plan. Just as for any of us, our earthly remains are something a bit morbid in death, yes, but also full of promise for the eternity that they are meant for. That's why we treat remains with such reverence. And so to depart with the bones of Joseph sort of turns this whole story full circle, does it not? It's a definitive parting from Egypt. It's a definitive moving towards the land that God swore he would give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's that sort of implementation we're talking about here. Okay, so now the Israelites have left Egypt, they've taken the bones of Joseph, and they're heading toward the Reed Sea, or the Red Sea. I'm probably going to fall right back into saying Red Sea, because that's how we all say it in English. But you know, in the Hebrew, it's the Reed Sea. Okay, chapter 14 of the book of Exodus. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal-zephon. You shall encamp facing it, by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land, the wilderness is closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart. Where am I? Sorry. And he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. Okay, so we have quite a bit here. But suffice it to say that what's at stake is the idea that Pharaoh will be resilient. He will be obstinate in the face of this departure. And it's to the glory of God that Pharaoh's obstinacy shines through. Remember when this whole event began, right? And Moses was sent and to let the people go. Not to let the people go into total freedom, but to let them go for 3 days, right? Moses is sent, let my people go, that they may worship me in the desert. The first call of redemption was simply for the leave to be able to worship God in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh would have none of it. He couldn't give them 3 days off. Pharaoh was obstinate at the beginning, and he's obstinate now. And even though he relented in the face of the destruction he just faced, you see how his resolve's buckling, and he doesn't want to lose his labor force. It's building these cities of Pithom and Ramses in the north, or what's called Lower Egypt, but is in the north. Because lower means by how the Nile flows. Okay. So they set off. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people, and asked, "What is this that we have done, releasing Israel from our service?" He ordered his chariot and took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots, and the rest of the chariots of Egypt, with officers in all of them. The Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites. As the Israelites were departing defiantly, the Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his warriors, overtook them and camped by the sea, near Pi-Hahiroth, before Baal-Zephon. Now this is easy to take, I can't get you. Okay, what, you can't hear me, or what? You're going to have to be a bit more specific with your comment. Okay. If you're having problems hearing me, just let me know, and I'll try to adjust somehow. Okay, so when it comes to this, though, you have Pharaoh changing his mind and going after them with 600 chariots and the rest of his picked chariots, and then the rest of the chariots, and then his horsemen and warriors, etc. It's easy for us to kind of take this for granted. Oh yeah, they're Egyptians. They have chariots because they don't have tanks. They have horses because they don't have cars. You know, oh, this is what you take. This is what you take in a battle. But think of how you were, if you were on the other end of it. Think of if you were on the other end of it. And you were fleeing a land by foot, and here's a whole crowd of people coming on mounted beasts with wagons. Okay, you finally got it. Okay, got you. So you're fleeing by foot, and you have all of these beasts of burden running after you with drivers on them, with chariots, these war chariots, which were top of the line of that day. Again, Egypt, the most powerful country in the world. And that's what you have. It's easy for us to kind of take it for granted, you know. You might think back, when you hear horseback riders, you might think more of like Poland in World War II fighting Nazi tanks. And it's portrayed on the History Channel or something as something backward. Though those Polish horsemen were actually pretty effective against those Nazi tanks. And they held out longer than the French did. So you gotta give them credit on that. So again, we can be tempted to roll our eyes at something like horses or chariots, because we supposedly have better stuff. But remember how it is for them. For 3,000 years ago, how they're facing these crowds of professional soldiers who can move 3 to 4 times faster than them, commanded by the king of the most powerful country himself, and they're bearing down on them. Okay? It's a bit intimidating. Remember when we were talking about Jacob returning from exile, returning from his mother's homeland, and meeting his brother Esau, right? He'd wrestled with an angel the night before, and the day of, as he begins to run into he sees that his brother Esau has amassed all his picked men and his whole forces. What does Jacob do? He sends out tribute, wave by wave by wave, right? Jacob basically breaks up his possessions and sends them out line by line, both to show vulnerability and to show a bit of suppliance in the face of Esau, saying, I'm helpless in your power. Hopefully you'll just respect what I have. So that was Jacob, about 600 years before this, and we recounted that at the in the book of Genesis, around, I guess, chapter 26, 22, somewhere around there in Genesis. Here, we're dealing with, again, the Israelites are armed. It says that they set out armed, but they're not professional soldiers. They're bricklayers, and here they are, and the mightiest army in the world is bearing down on them and can outrun them. That's the situation. And hopefully you're getting a sense from that description of how you would feel if you were with them. It's a pretty terrifying thing. It's not just, oh, he's sending horses because that's what you do. No, when you're on the other end of that, it feels quite a bit different indeed, does it not? Okay, let's keep going, because I think I've explained already how awesome horses are. And chances are, hopefully, you already know how great horses are. Okay. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them, and greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Again, quite reasonably, no? Quite reasonably. Cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us out to die in the wilderness?" Now, this is something you're going to see throughout the 40 years. And again, I hope this doesn't sound insensitive, because it ought not be. Jews are famous for their humor, and for their biting humor particularly. And they're often not afraid to direct it at God. And here, they're directing it to Moses, and by extension to God. And we're meant to laugh along with them, and to a degree, at this point at least, to laugh a bit at them too. But to laugh along with them in the sense that, yeah, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us out to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Remember, the real drama here isn't going to be one of military victory, though that will be there. It's going to be one of survival. It's going to be about survival in the face of insurmountable odds. So a bit of gallows humor, a bit of joking about the danger, it ought to even more deeply root it in our hearts. Okay. Let's keep going. What have you done for us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, "Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians"? For it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace." The idea here that we can see of how Moses is a source of courage and reassurance in the face of their wavering hearts. And again, it's understandable why their hearts waver. And their hearts waver towards a servitude, a limitation with safety. Sometimes I think we live in an age that's comparatively free for all the things we might need to work on. We're doing relatively well as a society on a variety of things. You can generally walk out your door and expect you're going to come home. You can generally expect that products from all over the world are available to you, whether in the store or by mail order now, or internet ordering. We have it pretty well off materially. Socially and spiritually, we're miserable, but materially, we got it together pretty well. So, when you see these Israelites clamoring for servitude, you could wonder, why are they such cowards? Why are they so inclined toward that? But remember how dangerous the world was, and indeed, in the past few months, we've realized how dangerous the world is. And I say that hopefully not to paralyze you, not to overwhelm you with a sense of that. I'm not trying to say this the way that a news report would, because I don't have the production value. You see, I'm sitting in a basement with a cockeyed camera. I can't keep your attention for a 24-hour news cycle. I'm trying to take this from a different idea, which is, yeah, the world is dangerous, and we make compromises to keep our safety. And Israel's servitude was an easy compromise to stay safe and well-fed. We'll see in the book of Numbers when they're still eating the manna, and they come to complain about it, and they're clamoring for the leeks and garlics and onions that they had in Egypt. And again, we might find that so funny because all of this food is plentiful for us, but for them it stood out so much. More on that when we get to it. But here, their hearts are cowering, and it's up to Moses to convince them to take the brave route. Again, bravery is not just about justice, it's about aiming for something that's difficult and worth it. Difficult and worth it. And so we are invited then to clamor ourselves for the things that are worth it. And that might involve sacrifices. That might involve cutting out friends or relationships that are servile. It might involve dead ends. But, as in stepping away from them. It might involve that kind of sacrifice. Or it may involve enduring things, you know. So, we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Then the Lord, so the Lord will battle for you. Hold your peace. Now this idea of the Lord battling for you, one commentary talks about how this is depicting God as a warrior, depicts his absolute control over the situation. That the Lord is battling for you against the Egyptians means that he has the situation firmly in hand between Israel and the Egyptians. And to see the Lord as a warrior on our behalf, not that he wants to squish our enemies like a bug, but that there really is this logic of, there really is this idea of God being in control, and subduing and directing things in accord with his vision. Moving on. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." So again, what's the tension here? They're close to the shore, and if they go further, they're going to be effectively trapped. They're going to be enveloped. So the question is going to be, what's the way to true safety? Is it to keep your options open and keep away from the coast so that you could go this way or that, or scatter in the face of the Egyptians? I mean, think of a bunch of, like, antelope in the face of a cheetah, right? Do you all want to go right by the water's edge? If you were an antelope and you saw cheetahs coming by, would you want to hang out by the shore? Because, honestly, I mean, maybe the cheetahs can't swim, so maybe this analogy is pretty bad. But hanging out by the shore, again, they don't know how to swim, though, in all likelihood. So hanging out by the shore effectively means a dead end. So when the Lord says to Moses here, tell the Israelites to go forward, he is telling them to do what looks like what will be a dead end. It looks like the Lord's commanding them to go into what's going to be unfruitful, is going to be unrewarding. And somehow Moses convinces enough of them to press forward in the face of their doubts and their questions to what will be their liberation and their vindication in the sight of the nations. For what will happen? Well, God says to Moses, "You will lift up your rod and hold out your hand over the sea to split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am Lord, when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen." Again, this idea of a warrior's boasting, that we might establish that God is indeed in control in a situation that employs natural explanations, but with timing and providence that are not accountable for natural explanations. So, for example, it will be said later that, the Lord splits the sea, but it will also be said that the Lord sends a wind that blows over the sea all night in order to part this lake. So, which is it? Well, as Christians, we can say it's probably both. That God uses natural forces for the glory and accomplishing of his tasks. That's no deep question. That's a fairly straightforward one on our end. Okay. So, you see the plan. The Israelites have to take trust in the Lord and trust that going to the shore of the lake isn't a dead end. Going to the shore of the Reed Sea, or Red Sea, is not fruitless. And Moses has to have the confidence to know, as he's seen over the 10 previous plagues, that striking his staff can do something. So everyone's invited to a faith and a courage, and looking to the Lord to work what they look for. Verse 19. The angel of the Lord, who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, now moved and followed behind them, and the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them. This pillar of cloud, of course, was manifesting God's presence among them. Excuse me. Cloud during the day, fire during the night. And now, instead of leading them, it now becomes the basis that separates them from the Egyptians. Okay? The pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind, and it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the other all through the night. Comment on cast the spell, namely that it turns so totally dark that they're incapable of approaching. And so, while the Egyptians may have the technological advantage, while they may have the advantage of speed, the Israelites have the Lord and his providence, and it's enough to overcome the disparity of forces here. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night. See? Natural force put at God's word, serving at God's beckoning and service, through the ministry of Moses. And turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, and the Egyptians went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of their chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Israel." So we have here this remarkable sign, right? The splitting of the water, one that the Israelites passed through readily enough, and the Egyptians are encumbered and clogged and unable to pursue. And that ultimately, when the wind ceases and the waters cease to be held, the waters will wash over the Egyptians. St. Ambrose of Milan, I think we have to take here, both in the sign of the cloud and in the action of the sea, we have to take here a sort of a quasi-sacramental look at this. I know that's jargon, I'll explain. Quasi-sacramental in the sense that we're seeing God's power and triumph through the physical world, through physical means. St. Ambrose would say, water by its nature doesn't wall up to the right or left. That's a sign of divine action. And so also it's a sign of divine action when God invests power in the waters of baptism, or invests power to transform bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. This takes nature and brings it beyond the order of nature, by the God who is beyond nature. And that's what the Israelites are prepared for, and what ultimately prepared them and us to receive the sacraments, to understand that the passing through the Reed Sea was nothing compared to the baptismal bath that saves us from a still greater oppressor. So we're prepared to see, though, in how God commands the elements, how he's in control, and how he's in control in our lives, too, for our welfare as well. And so now, why don't we keep going, and then I have a bit of a commentary on it. So the Egyptians are in panic, their wheels are stuck in the mud. So what happens now? Well, you probably know. The Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come down upon the Egyptians, and upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." Moses, just checking the time, and we have plenty more, Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled its approach. But the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Egyptians had marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and their left. Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared God. They had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Okay. Quite a bit here now. Quite a bit here. Well, I think it's good to keep in mind that the limitations of their poetry, of their poetic expression, leave a variety of interpretations open. Now, I say that not to fulfill it with a particular narrative. You know, there's the story of the old Jewish widow at her husband's funeral, and she's talking to a fairly liberal rabbi who is not as certain about the existence of God, but for whatever reason became a rabbi. It happens. I mean, it happens in various forms of clergy. So she's talking to him and says, you know, I'm comfortable, you know, knowing my husband's passed on because he's going to the Lord, he's going to God. And the rabbi, I don't know why he would have said this, but said, well, why are you sure there's a God for him to go to? Why you would say that at a funeral, I don't know. But this led to, well, I mean, if there's no God, who saved us at the Red Sea? And the rabbi said, well, let me explain. You know, the Israelites were poor and they were fleeing and they didn't have horses, so they were light. And the Egyptians were wealthy and were on chariots, so they were heavy. And so what you have here is it's simply a description of a natural event. The Israelites went through this wetland, and they were unencumbered because they didn't have possessions to weigh them down. Meanwhile, the Egyptians had all of this retinue and glory and military might, and so they were weighed down. And so when it says God's fighting against the Egyptians, it's just the tide and the mud. And the older Jewish widow kind of takes it in, and, you know, an onlooker who reports this story was worried, because this seemed to be a simple woman who, you know, probably didn't appreciate her faith being overturned like an apple cart like that. So she's relatively silent. And so this onlooker was a bit concerned. But then she goes, "Oh, so you were there." You were there. Okay, I see. And I hope you see the point of the punchline. That we have to be careful about providing eisegesis to the Bible. We don't want to take this book and have it say what we were already expecting to happen. This rabbi who assumes he can't know whether there's a God or not, you know, wants to kind of take the shading off of particular incidents that that go against his narrative. A friend of mine went to college at a pretty prestigious institution here in the Northeast, and he was told that in the book of Exodus, God was a literary device for the purpose of the narrative. And I'm sorry, but you can believe all sorts of things, but I don't think that's the way this is meant to be understood. There are times where God's narration is a literary framing device, sure, but you weren't there. You weren't there. So, again, I think this is reason for us to be a bit reticent about coming to conclusions, but I'm not saying that in a way that undermines the traditional story. This clearly is a manifestation of God's divine providence and power. There seem to be natural elements at work here as well. Clogging the wheels of the Egyptians with mud doesn't require a miracle. And yet the confluence of these things, the timing of the wind and of the tides and of the walls of water, again, it seems to invite us to come to faith in the one who has control over all these things, and who would speak again on the shore and on the Sea of Galilee, where wind and wave would again obey his word. So we're invited to that. But I think we have to also avoid, say, taking the 1950s Cecil B. DeMille production and saying, this is what this text is describing. Well, in that text, number one, Moses is wearing a wristwatch as he parts the water, and nothing about that here. Okay, but, you know, that was a lame joke. But to the point of a dramatic sign that would have looked great on film, I don't know if the Exodus would have looked great on film. I'm not saying it didn't. I wasn't there. But I think we have to be ready to see how God's action can be miraculous, but also look a bit more ordinary. You know, we've had hundreds of saints canonized in the past 50, 60 years. Hundreds of them. And plenty of miracles that are attested to, that doctors can't explain. But they seldom happen with the drama and the flair of earlier miracles. Because, to be fair, we don't need them. And if we get the sign, and we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, we don't need more drama. I know we want more drama. We want more confirmation. But we see here that the confirmation here was enough for the Israelites, who feared the Lord and had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So, the incident at the Reed Sea, the incident of passing through the waters dry shod, this incident, which will be repeated at the banks of the Jordan, this incident is one that is not only for the instruction of the Egyptians who were so obstinate, it's also for the knowledge and awareness of the Israelites who were tempted to doubt God, right? They were sooner ready to settle for servitude. And having been redeemed in this way that led to the rout of Pharaoh's army, they're ready to accept and trust a bit more. So let their journey be our journey. That God, now, again, does that mean God's going to win the battles you have in front of you right now? I don't know. But the biggest battle in your life, namely whether your heart and mind are conformed to God, has already been won. Because through baptism, you've already passed through the waters. And in the sacraments, you've already been fed with the manna. You've already been brought to the promised land. Now, you say it's not dramatic enough. It's not exciting enough. How do I know this is enough? Well, you know it's enough from the fruit it bears. You know it's enough because it allows you to live more charitably and more deeply than you ever would have been able to on your own. And it allows you to see other things, the created order, and our whole story with the light and the context it deserves. So, that's my waxing poetic on that. Why don't we move on to this wonderful poem that Moses and Miriam sing at the side of the Red Sea. This is one of the most ancient poems in the Jewish scriptures. Yeah, I'm just taking a look at a bit of this. Yeah, so it is incredibly ancient, and we found poems in neighboring areas to the Holy Land that have similar sorts of ways of describing their deities, which doesn't mean that these things don't truly describe God. It means these are the concepts that the Israelites have on hand in talking about God. Okay. So why don't we go through it? Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. Again, the idea of having just been delivered, they sing praise. Now we live in a culture where we're consumers of music, not really producers of it. And even at Mass, it can be hard to get people to sing. But this dynamic is one we're meant to enter into. If you look at the book of Revelation, it talks about how the saints triumphant sing the song that Moses sang in triumph over the Red Sea. So we're invited to a similar song by hearing them sing it here. And if you're not comfortable singing, well, you're going to learn on your way into the heavenly choir. And, excuse me, again, if you're self-conscious about singing, well, don't worry. You'll have your own part to play. But make sure you're working on your part. Make sure you're working on your part of it. Oh yeah, you can't see my left hand gesticulating here. I'm Italian. If you don't see my left hand, just assume it's gesticulating off frame. Okay? Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Okay? The Lord is my strength and my might. He has become my deliverance. This is my God. I will enshrine him. I will enshrine him. I will glorify him. What have you. So, this is a Hebrew testimony, and it has a beautiful line here about how this beautifying means to glorify, but it also means to extend beauty to the created order in reflection of God's beauty. And so every time you create a sacred space that's beautiful, or you beautify your house, or you build up the created world in a way that contributes to the order and beauty of the world, you're glorifying God and his beauty in a proper way. The God of my father, I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. Lord is his name. Again, that warrior language is reflecting his power and his victory in this situation. Pharaoh's chariots and army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. Okay? So again, the Lord is a warrior, and his name is Lord, is Adonai, is the Tetragrammaton. So this is someone that they've come to know by name. And he's someone that's come to deliver this particular form of deliverance. It's not just a general, the Lord will deliver us who knows when, who knows how. Yes, I know that I was just saying how the deliverance itself might not have looked as dramatic as Cecil B. DeMille depicted it. Fine. But I'm not saying it's not a real deliverance. I hope you know that. I mean, I became a priest, so obviously I think this is a true story. Often our deliverance doesn't look picture perfect, whether in relationships or in friendships or what have you. But it's still a real deliverance, and it shows how beautiful of a story we're meant to be part of. The depths covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. God's hand, his right hand, is often used, anyone's right hand, is used figuratively as a source of power. I mean, we say this when you would say something like, he's fallen into their hands. They've fallen into their hands. That's an emphasis that reflects that sort of idea of having power over something or someone. So again, to talk about the Lord's right hand doing all these things says, Lord, it was you who did this. This wasn't just a confluence of circumstances. Though God's power could use circumstances, it's his hand that directs those circumstances. do times make the men or do men make the times, right? That's one of the old lines. And in this case, there are modern critical scholars today who say it's the circumstances who create the God. So they would take a story like this and they would say, well, the Hebrews framed the circumstances and deduced a God from them. But no, we would say it's the God who arranged the circumstances, that the Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, in his providence and ordering, brought them to this point. And there are parts of this story that I've alluded to, right? The awkwardness of approaching the sea when you have no rational expectation of being able to cross. It's those sort of circumstances and details that give lie to the idea this is simply a natural event that was rationalized later. Now, it could have had natural elements. I think we've established that. But obviously, the confluence of circumstances is the reflecting of God's providence. Which God? This God, whose right hand directs and shatters all these things. In great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. So, this is a mixed metaphor, right? There's the strength that breaks enemies, and there's the fiery anger of the Lord. Again, anger, when you want to say someone got angry in Hebrew, the literal expression is his nose got hot. The idea is that you kind of heat up. And so the idea here of fury that consumes like straw kind of reflects that idea. So it's a mixed metaphor, but it works out. Let's go on. At the breath of your nostrils, the waters piled up. At the blast of your nostrils, the floods stood straight like a wall. The depths froze in the heart of the sea. So again, the blast of God's nostrils as the wind, isn't one or the other. It's both. Okay? The foe said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword, my hand shall subdue them. So this is a common framing and explanation. It's one that, in the midst of a poem, sometimes you'll quote the enemy. Maybe you do this, say, when you're telling a story about someone you've had to deal with, and you quote what someone else was reacting or what he said. And often you'll put them in a dumb voice, like, and then he said, well, you have 5 vacation days, and there's only 5 days left, so you better take them now. We can't roll any of them over. So you make a voice like that to kind of mock the people that you're talking about. And maybe you're being unfair. Maybe you're being fair. I don't know who you might be complaining about. But here, no indication of the voice it's read in, but you kind of have to give that sense, that it's quoting the enemy and his thoughts, and applying it, showing the disconnect that the foe has from the way things really are, right? These are those who are about to be buried in the sea. And what is it to have them talking about? How they're going to pursue, overtake, divide the spoil, bear the sword, and subdue them. Okay? The idea being, here they are making their plans of what they're going to do with the wealth when their upset is about to take place. There's an irony here, and we're meant to enter into it and savor it. Okay? You made your wind blow, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. Who is like to you, Lord, among the celestials? Who is like to you, majestic in holiness, awesome in power, working wonders? Celestials here means the court of the gods. And of course, the gods here wouldn't actually refer to a belief in a polytheistic religion, but it's saying that whatever spirits, whatever other influences are out there, who is like to you among them? It's a confession that, again, remember, God took on the gods of the Egyptians. He played an away game. And he smashed them so thoroughly that here they are in the face of their victory. God's demonstrated to them that he's more powerful than the most powerful gods of the most powerful nation on earth. And not only that, because that's one thing, he's more powerful than their army too. They're riding a high. I hope you're riding a bit of a high too. I've just kind of come into one right now. To think of how thorough that is. That's why we read this reading every Easter Vigil. This is something that always comes up, because it ought to be seen as the triumph we have over the world, the victory that we have over the world because of our faith. That's what allows us to conquer the world, when we don't settle for the standards that the world sets. You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love you led the people you redeemed. In your strength you guide them to your holy abode. The peoples hear, they tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm they are as still as stone. Till your people cross over, O Lord. Till your people cross whom you have ransomed. Okay. The idea is that there's a common trajectory here from leaving Egypt to coming into their own in the land. And so it recounts all the different peoples that they are to encounter. Peoples that are going to oppose them, even make war against them. And just to say that the action of God's redemption, you see in a poem like this, is a single unified action. Because not only does he lead them out of Egypt and then leave them in the desert on their own, he leads them through the desert, long as it might take. He is the one leading them, and will lead them through all of these other challenges. It's one and the same redemption. And we'll see, say in the book of Judges, or the book of Joshua, the book of Numbers, how these different nations come to fear Israel on account, in part, of the rumors of this event, of the rumors of what they've been able to do here. What more accurately, what God was able to do with them here. So you will, I love this line though, till your people cross over, O Lord, till your people cross whom you have ransomed. The idea that this is the first crossing, but it points to the second. That this isn't over till they cross the Jordan. This isn't over till they cross over into a land that was promised to Abraham. And that we too may have been saved from things in this life, whether addictions, or disappointments, or unhealthy relationships, or even the darkness of error, or ignorance, or unbelief. We may have been saved from so many things. But that's only the first crossover. There's one that remains, and its victory will be even more total. So, you will bring them in and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. So, there's this allusion to the fact that there's going to be one place where the Lord dwells. But it's not just Moses singing. The women take up their song. Verse 20, chapter 15. Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, Sing to the Lord, he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went out into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Well, I'm jumping ahead. Why don't we go to this first? Because it's interesting to see the women's role here. Again, I think the way that people would often criticize the Bible is women are spectators, it's a patriarchy, men do everything, women kind of have to take it. Well, number one, it's ancient times and everyone's poor. A lot of people have to take a lot of things. You know, most men didn't really choose their trades, for instance. You didn't really have the luxury of inventing yourself in the Bronze Age. So one, and again, there were real issues that we dealt with, we've talked about in the past, and maybe we should reckon more fully on how women were treated. But, just to say that they're not entirely passive, and we see here how women, in a sense, sum up the battle. You know, when the soldiers return, the women sing, and they choose who to acclaim based on what they've heard. And so, you know, you could point to, oh, well, that's just them being oriented to man's glory. Okay, that could be. It also means that they pass judgment. They can praise whom they will. No one's putting a gun to their head. They don't got them. So women get their voice, too, in this matter. And though they don't bear the brunt of going to the front and dying for it, they put up with considerable risks themselves, especially if the men lose. And so they sing to great aplomb, and quite understandably. And to acknowledge that unique voice and to treasure and protect it is the responsibility of every man born of a daughter of Eve. Okay? That's what we're made for. And to a degree, it's what you're made for. You know, men and women are made for each other. And I can say that as a celibate, too. Okay. So they go 3 days into the wilderness from the Sea of Reeds. but could find no water. They came to Mara, but could not drink the water, because it was bitter. That's why it was called Mara. Mara literally means bitter. It was probably brackish mixed with salt, what have you. Again, all of these pools and seas near the Nile were likely those who, they had some admixture and some flow from the Red Sea, and which is more saline than the ocean in general, because there's a lot of evaporation there. So you got a lot of salt, and you're about to get some salty talk. The people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. He said, "If you will heed the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping all his laws, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." So, this is interesting. I never knew this. So, just to be clear, with regard to this wood thrown into the water to make it sweet, that's something that has been taken by the Church Fathers as a sign of the cross. The idea that the cross takes the suffering and bitterness of this life and makes it drinkable, makes it bearable, makes it potable in the face of our struggles. Fine, well, and good. Okay. But here's a natural explanation, which again is part of the explanation, but not the full. A piece of wood or a branch with its foliage. Even today, Bedouin are these they're nomads who live in the desert and still herd livestock. When I went to Israel, you would see the Bedouin by the sides of the road with their different flocks. They have all sorts of interesting customs. Anyway, and I only met a few at a rest stop, like a Jersey Turnpike style gas station. They were kind of hanging out, watering their donkeys. Anyway, Bedouins would sweeten brackish water with shrubs that pulled the salt to the bottom. That's interesting. I guess maybe there's a way sometimes it could be done naturally. But I think, to be clear, there's this fact that, there's that standard practice. But to be able to give thirst for so many, again, that's that issue. And for one branch to do it for a pool that could quench the thirst of thousands, this is where we're going with this, okay? Okay. And so he gives them that fixed rule, okay, right? That fixed rule to put them to the test. If you heed the Lord your God diligently, then I will not harm you the way I brought the Egyptians. And so, you remember how it said, I am the Lord, am your healer? The commentary points out, and I think this is worth saying, that this extends not only to the pool of water. This not only extends to the people, it extends to the pool of water. That the same verb could be used for healing that water and making it potable. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there beside the water. Let's take a look at these two Christian commentaries, and let me check the time, because I know I've been going for a while. Sorry. Okay, yeah, we're about to wrap up. So why don't we take a look at the patristic understanding of this. The 12 springs of water and the 70 palm trees at a place that had more on offer. Okay, let's see. So, yeah, okay, this confirms my patristic reading of the cross. Okay, and this is about the manna, which we'll get to next time. Okay, let's see what the Orthodox Study Bible has. That's pretty good. Because this symbolism of the 70 palm trees is significant. And if I don't have it here, I'll just wing it, like I do half the stuff I do here. You say, we know, Father. Okay, yeah. But you're still here, so I guess I do a decent enough job. Okay. Yeah. So Israel camped by 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees. Similarly, the 12 apostles of Christ were 12 fountains of spiritual water, which quenches the thirst of those who seek the true God. Also, Christ sent forth the 70 disciples, to provide heavenly shade from desert heat. So this image of Elim is taken as one of the church. Again, 12 is a number that signifies fullness, as is 70. Each of these a different sort, right? 12 reflecting an integral whole and base and foundation. 70 reflecting the full measure. You know, we say 3 is a crowd. I think they would say 70 is a crowd. When you get to 70, you know something's happening, is kind of the point. Remember that when they went down to Egypt, how many were they? They were 70. The sons of Joseph, the sons of Jacob were 70, and their children and wives and whatnot were 70. So here, these are the 70 palm trees, and so it's a sign for Israel of the fruitfulness of that place to rest for a time. And after the salty bitterness at Marah, this is a chance for refreshment. And so as the Lord continues to lead them forward, there's going to be both of those moments, right? The bitter moments that lead them to grumble, and the sweet moments that provide some reprieve. But the wisest course to take in all of it is one of trust. Not being afraid to call the bitter water bitter, but not being so dismayed to the point of thinking of stoning Moses himself. So that's where we are, and we're about at time. So, seeing as how I see no particular questions on the screen, I'll close with a prayer, though this is your chance. So, if you do cough up one by the time my prayer is done, I promise I'll answer it. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I know that some of you are really enjoying this Where in the World is Father Leo broadcasting Bible study from. And not to toot my own horn, but I can promise that this will continue next week as I will be on vacation. So I don't know exactly where I'll be broadcasting next week. It might even be in the car while I'm going from one place to another. So stay tuned. We'll find out. All the best.